I don't know how much value I have in this universe, but I do know that I made a few people happier than they would have been without me. And as long as I know that, I'm as rich as I ever need to be.
Joining us now is our friend David Misch. David began his career in show business, writing for such television series as Police Squad, Saturday Night Live, and Late Night with David Letterman. David began his career in television as a story editor for Mork and Mindy. And David, though it is a sad occasion, it is good to have you back on the program nonetheless.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I was a number of the old Mork people have gotten. It's so funny. We had a reunion of the Mork and Mindy staff writers about a month ago. So, and I had just gotten the photos in the email that morning when the news came through, and we were comparing notes about things, and some of them said, they knew that I did not, that Robin suffered from depression. The first time I heard that was when the reports of his suicide came through. So I know, obviously, and now everyone knows that Robin had, significant addiction problems over the years, but depression was an added element I was unaware of, and I don't know when that happened. I doubt it was during the original TV show, but in any case, he fought through a lot, and in fighting gave a lot of people a lot of pleasure.
He became a star because of Mork, but going back to his first appearance on Happy Days, I understand Robin was actually a last-minute replacement.
Yeah, they had hired John Byner, who was a Vegas comic who did impressions, for that role. And Byner, I think, had 2 or 3 days on the set and quit, saying it was the stupidest role he'd ever played in his life, and it was just beneath him, and he wasn't going to do it. So the show shot on Friday, and it was now Wednesday, and they had no one to play the main guest role. So Gary's casting director had been frequenting the comedy clubs and saw Robin and called him in for an audition, and he was in the waiting room, and she went out and said, okay, the role you're auditioning for is an alien. And so he went in and sat on his head, and that was later incorporated in the show, of course. But Gary Marshall, the producer of the show, just broke up and hired Robin on the spot. And then the Happy Days episode was a huge success, and so he decided to make a series out of it. Another funny thing is that he sold the series, and Robin and Pam Dauber, had the female star of the show, had never seen each other when Gary sold the show. What he did is he took a shampoo commercial that Pam had done and some little TV spots that Robin had done and cut them together so it looked as if they were interacting with each other, and that sold the show to ABC. So that was pretty clever on Mr. Marshall's part.
Yeah, well, back then, Gary Marshall could have ripped a page out of the phone book and sold it as a concept. That's how hot he was.
At one point, he had, I think it was 5 of the top 10 TV shows in America.
Yeah.
Well, and that's never been equaled. I doubt it ever will be.
Yes, I mean, certainly not today. And, being someone who came of age watching television in the late 60s, early 70s, I mean, I saw John Byner on all sorts of stuff. I know John Byner was a funny man, but there's no way the show would have taken off without Robin, because it was a combination of what you and the other writers wrote and Robin's own brand of comedy that really made it take off.
Yeah, Byner would have been fine, and if they'd made a series out of it, it would have been another version of My Favorite Martian, which was a sort of okay TV series sitcom of the early 60s, but it wouldn't have been anything like what it was. By the way, a fun thing, anyone who ever sees that episode of Happy Days, look very closely, and you'll see that the sleeves on Robin's uniform don't come all the way to the edge of his arm because it was Byner's. They didn't have time to remake the costume, and Byner was larger than Robin. So it was really a last-minute thing.
One of the myths, and I'll admit, I used to think this a lot. The myth is that Robin Williams ad-libbed everything on Mork and Mindy. The reality, I understand, is quite different.
Well, I'll tell you why I believe it. It's because it was in the New York Times. The fact that it was in the New York Times made me doubt there was ever a war in Vietnam. I thought, how could this happen? So we'd taken off. We were a huge hit, and a Times reporter asked if he could have run of the show, if he could go anywhere and do anything and report in depth on the whole thing. So he was allowed to come into the writer's room while we wrote the scripts and things like that. So he knew that there was never, as he wrote, a point where we would write in the script, Mork does his own thing here. It simply never happened. Now, by the fourth season, when Jonathan Winters was on, there were sections of the show that were improvised. He and Jonathan would say, "I had a dream," and Mork would say, "Tell me about it," and then they'd go into a little bit. But other than that, it was all scripted, and Robin would have killed us if it weren't scripted. He didn't want to have to, go out there and hope for the best. He wanted us to write stuff, and if he could come up with something better, hooray. But everything was written. And the other thing, though, is that everything having been written, it doesn't mean Robin couldn't have improvised and come up with a lot of better things.
Absolutely.
Our writing wasn't the best in the world. But the problem there, and the reason not that much that he ad-libbed got on the air, is that 90% of it was obscene.
Yes.
I mean, Robin loved to swear.
Yes.
He swore like a sailor, and
Yes.
he literally would have nuns in the audience laughing their asses off. I mean, he was the most profane human being alive, but he did it with such, vitality and innocence and exuberance that no one could be offended by it. And the other thing he did a lot was grab his crotch, which, was not it was long before Michael Jackson, so it really couldn't get on TV.
Yeah.
But what he did do, I mean, to me, the story of Robin Williams is a lot more nuanced than it's sometimes portrayed. And his relationship to the success of Mork and Mindy is not that he ad-libbed everything, because he didn't. What it was is that if John Byner had been doing those same lines, it wouldn't have been a hit. Robin brought such, amazing charisma to everything he said and did. And he did improvise, but it was smaller and subtler. He would do little voices and faces and things with his body that would bring out elements of the line that no one, including the writers, had ever thought of. And he did ad-lib actual lines from time to time. If we had a particularly lame thing, he could sometimes come up with something better. So he deserves all the credit. He just doesn't deserve that specific credit.
Well, two things. What if you mentioned that a lot of times, he would grab his crotch or he would swear, if he went up on a line. The other night, in preparation for our conversation, David, I found one of the old gag reels. I don't remember which year it was, but I
think it was the first year. I'm pretty sure that's the only one I've ever seen. That was so popular it was sold under the table for like $50 on Hollywood Boulevard.
Okay, well, it speaks to what you just said. 9 times out of 10, he's trying to get a certain line right, and when he doesn't, then he ad-libs. But the other thing is, being a classically trained actor as he was, and people forget, it's easy to forget that. I would imagine, he would appreciate what you and the other writers brought to the table. It gave him a structure, it gave him something to play off of.
Absolutely. He was, appropriately appreciative of us, but he was also sometimes frustrated. I can't actually say I ever saw him frustrated with us. Not all of our scripts were great, but I think he accepted that as part of the price you pay for cranking out a script a week.
Yes.
His frustrations were mostly with the network and executives who said and did stupid things. But he was always respectful to us, and when a particular script was particularly good, he was effusive in his praise. But more important than his praise was his laugh. He had a great, big, generous laugh, and it was pretty rewarding to be sitting there at the table where you do the first read of that week's script and hear him barking out his sort of nerve-jangling laugh every few moments. That was a great feeling.
We're talking to award-winning television writer-producer David Misch. David Misch began his career as a story editor on Mork and Mindy, the show that made Robin Williams a star. Robin Williams passed away on Monday, August 12th. I've been watching a lot of Bob Newhart, particularly the CBS show from the 70s. And Newhart was notorious for not wanting to rehearse too much because he did not want to become so familiar with the material that it no longer seemed fresh to him. And plus, that was also a direct line from his training as a stand-up comic. He liked to be as fresh and in the moment as possible. How did that compare with Robin's approach in doing the show?
It's interesting because it's a variant. Robin had no problem with rehearsal, except he had a big problem with waking up early. He kept very late performing at club after 4 or 5 clubs a night. So 9 o'clock was not his favorite hour of the morning. But he had no problem with the discipline of rehearsing. What he did have a problem with was saying something that people didn't laugh at. That was a big problem for him, and it was a significant problem because he would get a line, he would get his lines for the show on Monday, and then they'd rehearse Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and we shoot on Friday. So that's 4 days where the lines are just hitting in the studio, and everyone on the set had heard them a million times. He wanted the crew to laugh. He wanted the other actors to laugh. So he would frequently get bored with a line and throw in another one. Now, sometimes we would incorporate into that into the show, or we'd adjust it and do a variation on it. But then sometimes what would happen, and this is something all the writers have reminisced about, is that on the day of the show, he would do the line he had come up with, and it wouldn't get a laugh. And then he'd go back to the original written line, and the audience thought it was an ad lib. They would laugh hysterically. And again, Robin was not trying to fool anyone. That's just how he worked. Here's an example I thought of the subtlety of the way the interaction between Robin and the writing staff, and it's a personal one. On the first episode, there's a very famous moment where Robin's in the kitchen, and he's come to Earth. Mork has come to Earth in an egg as a spaceship. Mm-hmm. And he sees a carton of eggs, and he assumes, as anyone would, that it was 12 little astronauts inside their spaceships, trapped there. So he takes an egg and he throws it in the air and goes, "Fly, be free!" And of course it crashes to the counter and splat, and he's horrified, and it got a huge laugh. So I wrote that, but how much of it did I write? Robin's act, I was familiar with Robin's stand-up act. I'd seen it a few times, and one of the things he would do is go around to tables in the nightclub, and he'd pick up a napkin or a pencil, anything he could find. He'd do little bits with it. And one of the things he would do is he'd take a fork, and he'd throw it in the air and go, "Fly, be free." So that was a line he had used. He didn't use it exactly as I used it, but we sort of collaborated on that laugh because I was taking something he was very familiar with and getting a laugh with it. So we tried to work, with him. And we had such an incredible gift with one of the funniest men who ever lived. We were not going to impose everything on him. We wanted to take as much as we could from him.
We're talking to David Misch, award-winning television writer-producer David Misch. David began his career in television as a story editor for Mork and Mindy, the show that made Robin Williams a star. David is also the author of Funny, the book, everything you always wanted to know about comedy from every conceivable angle, with examples from the worlds of movies, television, theater, stand-up comedy, and a whole lot more. Funny, the book is available at davidmisch.com, and David is sharing some memories of working with Robin Williams on Mork and Mindy. And the story you just shared with us, David, about using that bit with the napkin that you appropriated from Robin's stand-up act, it kind of speaks to something we talk about a lot on the show, which is, and you talk about this in Funny the Book as well, both within the context of Mork and Mindy and other examples in movies and television. With television in particular, humor comes from the character. A line may not necessarily be funny, but if the character says it, knowing what you know about the character, that will bring out the humor of the situation. I would imagine, it was a combination of it had to be a big advantage, getting to know Robin and seeing his act, and plus you just working with him, in the course of the week, you would be able to incorporate different bits of him, his humor, and his personality as you wrote the show week to week.
Absolutely, but there was a tension. So the role of Mork was an acting job for Robin. It was not him. In fact, in some ways, he was the polar opposite of Mork. What they shared was a childlike enthusiasm for life. What they didn't share was naivete. Mork had never been to Earth, and everything was new to him, and that was the fundamental joke of the show, is that he would look at a snowflake and think, he was going to be crushed to death by these horrible white things that were falling inexplicably from the sky. But Robin knew everything. Robin had been everywhere. Robin had done everything, even at a very young age, a very charismatic guy. And one of the things he knew most about was sex. And Mork knew nothing about sex. So there was a tension because Robin got bored with playing someone who he felt after a certain period of time was no longer naive but just stupid. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to infuse his own knowledgeable ideas about the world into the character, which wouldn't work. It would kill the character. So especially as the series went on, there was that tension between writing something that the character Mork would say and knowing that the actor Robin would feel some frustration with having to do it. That was not really there the first season. It was fine. And I know that Robin recognized after a while that his infusing his own character into Mork was starting to make Mork less likable, and he pulled back from that as the series then went on further. But that was one of the. But that's something you do in every sitcom. I mean, the people who wrote for Frasier had to know Kelsey Grammer and know what he was like and know the things he really enjoyed saying and didn't enjoy saying, and you adjust. I mean, that's really one of the challenges and one of the glories of working for specific actors, and it's been going on since the beginning of drama, certainly Shakespeare. People forget there's a jester in almost every Shakespeare show, and there's kings in every show. Those were all played by the same actors. He had a jester actor, and he had to write a role for him in the next play because that's what this actor did. So it's no different on a sitcom, although possibly not at the same artistic level.
I had a chance to talk to your friend Bill Marks about the excellent Marx Brothers television collection that's now available on DVD. So I've been watching a lot of Groucho Marx, both for the program and in my spare time. And while there's been a lot has been said about the direct line between Jonathan Winters and Robin Williams, is it safe to say there's a direct line between Groucho and Robin?
Before I even answer that, I want to go back to Winters because something hit me, and I'm sure it's hit many other people this last week. But the one pretty horrible direct line between them is that Jonathan Winters was mentally ill.
Yes.
He was committed to an asylum a few times, and at Paramount he said he would always park in the handicapped places because he would say, "I'm mentally handicapped." But in any case, there that underlying darkness, I guess, was present in both of them, and we didn't ever really think it during the time of Mork that it was so much in Robin. As far as Groucho, Robin was a vacuum cleaner. He sucked up every conceivable influence. And Groucho was certainly one. He did a killer Groucho impression. But then again, there were very few sentient beings who Robin could not imitate brilliantly. But of course, his rapid fire wit, is an essential part of Robin's makeup. But he had so many people rattling around in him. He would get confused himself sometimes. And in fact, one thing I've been asked over the last time since Robin passed away was what did I think the best movie he was in was, Dead Poets or whatever. And I said that there was only one movie that truly captured the protean talents of Robin Williams, at least the comedic talents, and that was Aladdin. Aladdin, the animated thing where he didn't appear on screen, but his voice did. And that was Robin. That was Robin at his absolute peak. And I read, and it may be the same canard as with Mork and Mindy, but I recently read that he improvised about 70% of that part, that he went through it straight, he did the whole script, and then he said, "Do you mind if I play around a little?" And I said, sure, we'll keep recording and see what happens. And for the next 2 days, he just did everything that you hear in the final movie. But that, I wouldn't be surprised, because there's so much that does seem spontaneous in that. Robin contained multitudes.
That's very fitting in the sense, David, that, because the genie is an animated character, and one can argue whether, Robin was an animated character on some level. I guess when you think of his manic comedy, yes, that's very animated, but I hadn't thought of it like that, but even though he was brilliant in some of his dramatic roles in particular, and able to assume another character, another personality. When you think of the fact that it's an animated being that is the closest to the essential Robin Williams, that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. By the way, an interesting thing about those dramatic movies is that Robin was still Robin. Penny Marshall, the director of the movie Awakenings with Robin and Robert De Niro, says that he was just constantly being funny on the set, and that Robert De Niro would sometimes turn red from laughing so hard, and then they would have trouble getting the next shot because he was supposed to be dying, and he was all ruddy-faced and, flushed with laughter, and that Robin would sometimes start to crack in the middle of a shot, and that Penny had a secret signal behind the camera to let him know that no funny stuff here. Be serious.
Yeah.
So I'm sure as time went on, he didn't fall prey to that as much, but that was his essential nature. He just loved, as he called it, playing.
David Misch is the author of Funny the Book, everything you always wanted to know about comedy. David Misch began his career in television as a story editor for Mork and Mindy, the show that made Robin Williams a star. Robin Williams passed away on Monday, August 12th.